This move, nf3, initiates a flexible opening strategy, often leading to King's Indian attack or ready setups, aiming to control the center with pieces rather than pawns and preparing for castling. Black mirrors White's knight development, keeping options open for various Indian defenses and maintaining central flexibility. This move, c4, is a flexible and common response, often leading to the English opening, a system characterized by controlling the center from the flank and aiming for a solid pawn. Structure. This move prepares to develop the king's bishop and create a solid pawn structure, potentially leading to a Queen's Indian or Catalan formation depending on White's next moves. This move establishes central pawn control, aiming to develop a strong pawn duo that will dictate the flow of the game and prepare for Queen's side expansion, typical of Queen's pawn game structures. This move prepares to fianchetto the Queen's bishop, aiming to control the central light squares and potentially apply pressure on White's queenside pawn structure. This move aims to fianchetto the king's bishop, preparing to castle kingside and establish a solid pawn chain, a common strategy in systems like the English opening or King's Indian attack setup, while maintaining flexibility. Developing the bishop to b7 now supports White's central pawn push and prepares to pressure the queenside, a typical strategy in the Queen's Indian defense. This move develops the bishop to a strong diagonal, preparing for kingside castling and reinforcing control over the central light squares. This move completes Black's kingside fianchetto and prepares to castle, following a common setup in systems like the Queen's Indian or Catalan. Aiming for solid development, castling kingside achieves a crucial defensive objective, securing the monarch while simultaneously preparing to connect the rooks for future central action. Developing the king's rook to a more active square after castling is a standard strategic goal, preparing to potentially contest open files or support pawn advances. Developing the knight to c3 supports the central pawn advance and prepares for potential kingside or queenside expansion, maintaining flexibility in the early development. This move initiates a central pawn tension, aiming to undermine White's space advantage and open lines for Black's pieces, characteristic of many Queen's pawn game structures. This move boldly challenges Black's central pawn formation by attacking the d5 pawn and creating potential tactical opportunities for White's pieces. This move initiates a strategic maneuver to pressure White's central knight and prepare for queenside expansion with the pawn on a6. This move develops the bishop to a more active square, targeting the center and preparing to support a pawn push on c5 or e5 later. Black challenges White's central pawn control with a pawn sacrifice, aiming to disrupt White's pawn structure and open lines for their pieces. This move prepares to contest the c-file, anticipating Black's likely pawn push to c4 and reinforcing White's central control. This move challenges White's central control and opens lines for Black's pieces, aiming to disrupt the coordinated development and pawn structure White has established. This exchange in the center clarifies the pawn structure and opens the c-file for White's rook, a common strategic goal in many Indian defenses. This pawn exchange establishes a symmetrical central pawn structure and opens the e-file for Black's rooks, while also challenging White's knight on e5. Developing the bishop to e3 supports the central advance and prepares for potential kingside activity, while also creating an escape square for the knight should Black challenge the center with cxd4. The move qd6 strategically repositions the queen to support the advance of the c-pawn and prepares to contest the crucial d5 square. solidifying black's central presence and offering more active posturing. This move challenges black's central knight and aims to disrupt their coordination, potentially leading to pawn structure advantages or tactical opportunities. This move centralizes the queen, reinforcing the d5 pawn and preparing to challenge white's knight on c3, while also offering a potential exchange to simplify the position. This exchange of knights simplifies the position and opens the e-file, creating tactical possibilities for both sides regarding the d5 pawn and the vulnerable black king. This move captures the knight, opening the e-file and creating a passed pawn on the d-file for black, while also potentially disrupting white's central pawn structure. This capture strategically opens the d-file for white's rook and aims to disrupt black's pawn structure by creating a weakness on c5. This recapture on c5 opens the c-file for black's rook and strengthens white's pawn center, creating a dynamic tension. This move centralizes the queen, supporting the pawn on c5 and preparing to exert pressure along the c-file or on the kingside. This move prepares to contest the open c-file and potentially exert pressure on white's queenside structure. This move repositions the queen to a more active square, coordinating with the rook on the c-file and eyeing potential pawn advances or sacrifices on the queenside. This move connects the rooks, placing them on potentially active open files and preparing to contest the central d-file, aiming for greater piece coordination. This move prepares to solidify the queenside pawn structure and potentially develop the queen's bishop, but it weakens the queenside pawn chain and could allow black to target the c4 square later. This pawn advance on f5 aims to reinforce the d5 square and prepare for potential pawn pushes on the kingside, challenging white's control and opening avenues for black's pieces. This move reinforces the c-file, creating potential for a rook lift to the kingside or to support the advance of the f-pawn. The knight's repositioning to a6 aims to redeploy to c7, potentially disrupting white's control of the d5 square and reinforcing the pawn structure. This move prepares to double rooks on the d-file, aiming to increase pressure on black's d5 pawn and potentially open lines for attack. This move re-establishes the bishop's influence on the crucial dark squares and supports the advance of the f-pawn, aiming to create dynamic play and challenge white's central control. This knight move prepares to reroute to a more active square, likely f3 or g4, to support the d5 pawn and pressure black's position. The knight's move to b4 aims to exploit the weakened light squares around white's king and potentially exchange a piece to improve black's pawn structure. This move redeploys the rook to a more active central file, aiming to increase pressure on black's d5 pawn and potentially support a pawn push on the kingside or queenside. This move seeks to centralize the knight and prepare for potential pawn pushes on the kingside or maneuvers to contest the d-file. This maneuver repositions the knight to the edge of the board, aiming to contest control of the d5 square and potentially launch a counterattack on the queenside, as white's nc3 was previously supporting the central control. The bishop retreats to a more secure diagonal, reinforcing the e4 pawn and preparing to challenge white's control of the c-file. This move sacrifices the bishop to open lines for your rooks and create attacking chances against black's king while disrupting black's coordination. This pawn capture is a necessary defensive maneuver to neutralize white's aggressive pawn thrust and maintain material equality, though it leaves black with a potentially vulnerable doubled pawn. This exchange, occurring after a complex maneuvering phase, represents white's attempt to exploit black's somewhat passive pawn structure by sacrificing material for an open file and positional pressure. This move recaptures the pawn on circa 5, immediately challenging white's isolated queen's pawn and centralizing the knight to a more active square. This exchange of a knight for a rook on c8 wins material by capitalizing on black's pinned knight, and creates an open file for white's remaining rook. Black recaptures the piece, but more importantly, the bishop now eyes the open c-file and creates immediate threats against white's queen and rook. This move aims to dislodge black's strong bishop on c3, which has been a disruptive force, by forcing it to retreat and potentially creating new weaknesses in black's position. Black removes the attacking bishop, simplifying the position and preparing to contest the open c-file for counterplay. The recapture with the rook on d2 re-establishes material equality and opens the d-file for future operations, while the knight on b4 is now under significant pressure from the rook on d2. This pawn sacrifice aims to create an open e-file for black's rook and disrupt white's coordination, potentially leading to tactical opportunities after white recaptures. This move, Road 4, is a crucial defensive maneuver to protect the highly valuable passed pawn on d2, preventing it from being captured by the black queen and thereby reinforcing white's material advantage. This move is a brilliant tactical shot, sacrificing a pawn to expose the white king and create mating threats by bringing the queen into the attack along the now open diagonal. The king's hasty relocation to f2, while necessary to escape immediate threats, exposes it significantly, creating a target for black's active pieces and potential tactical skirmishes. The rook recaptures on the 8th rank, activating the piece and contesting the open c-file, while simultaneously preventing the white king from escaping via the c2 square. This exchange clears the queenside and resolves tactical complexities, offering white a material advantage after recapturing the rook with significant simplification. This recapture simplifies the material balance, and while it removes white's active bishop, it opens the g-file for black's rook, potentially leading to counterplay against the white king. The king is now exposed, but the immediate threat of the rook on d2 is neutralized by the pawn recapture. The queen now forcefully enters the kingside, directly threatening the weakened white king and forcing it to move, thereby gaining a tempo and creating further attacking chances. This move relocates the king to a safer square, avoiding immediate checks and potential discovered attacks arising from black's queen and rook. Coordination. Black's rc2 move targets the weakened light squares on white's kingside and aims to create immediate threats against the exposed king. This move aims to prevent the black queen from reaching g2 and also to defend the otherwise vulnerable white king. This move threatens to trap white's queen by potentially attacking it with the knight and rook, while simultaneously preparing to double rooks on the open d-file. This move forces the black king to a more exposed square, creating attacking chances for white along the open b-file and the discovered threats against black's position. This move aims to unpin the pawn on f7 and activate the king, preparing to join the defense or potentially counterattack in the complicated endgame. The rook repositions to the 4th rank, aiming to control the open file and potentially support a king advance or defend against black's active pieces. This move seeks to activate the king by bringing it closer to the queenside where white's rook is less active, potentially creating counterplay or defending against threats. This move forces the black king back, aiming to exploit the open diagonal and potentially set up a mating attack by bringing the queen closer to the exposed king. This move is a tactical blunder, as the king is now exposed to a decisive checkmate sequence starting with qh6. This move repositions the queen to a more active square, aiming to create threats against black's vulnerable king and potentially support a kingside attack. This move, qg4+, is a crucial tempo gain that forces the white king to move again and allows black to reposition their queen offensively, potentially leading to a perpetual check or even a mating attack if white is not careful.